In this portion, we're going to be working on the journal entries. This is a continuation of problem 6-2 that we started in class. The calculations have been done to calculate the revenue earned during each year, and they have been recorded in the income statement directly from the calculations. But the numbers in the financial statements have to come from the journal entries, so we're going to work on the journal entries. In a percentage completion method, there's 4 journal entries. So the first one is going to involve recording the contract costs. And we're going to use a construction and process account, which is an inventory account. And on the credit side, we're crediting the various items that go into completing the contract, things such as inventory, wages payable, could be cash as well. So whatever it is the company is using to complete the contract. And we're going to go get our cost numbers from the problem data. So again, just a reminder that the problem data is provided on an aggregate basis. For the first year, that doesn't make much of a difference, but for 2015, for example, when we pick up our cost data from the question, because the costs are cumulative, we have to subtract the cost from the prior year to get only the current year numbers. And we're going to do the same thing with 2016, and by using the same formula, I'm deaggregating my numbers. And there we go. So we have our cost numbers. Now just bear in mind here as well, I'm just going to use my check figure, and it adds up to the 9.3, which is the total cost that was provided at the end of the contract. So now just so we can see our data, I'm going to hide the calculations for the revenue as well as my income statement. I'm going to need my revenue though, my revenue numbers for my journal entry, because I need to record the expenses and the revenues on the contract. So let me just hide my calculations here, and I just need to keep my revenue number. And there we go. Second journal entry involves recording the billing on the contract. So record billings. And just for clarification, I call them billings as opposed to invoicing, just to make sure that the point is clear that we separated the invoicing from the revenue recognition. The invoicing comes from contract dates and invoicing dates. So this is a debit to accounts receivable, because they're collectible, and a credit to a new account called progress billings. And this is also a balance sheet account. It's a contra asset account that will track our invoices. So my accounts receivable right here from my billings, and again my numbers are aggregated, so when I record the 2015 numbers, I have to subtract the 2014 numbers. Push this over to the side, so now I just fill in for 2016, and again with my check figure right here, I'm just going to add a cross, and this adds up to my contract price. So I've captured all my data. So again here, just to show that these are my check figures in this column right here. And I'll just copy over my years here just to make sure we remember which year we're talking about. My third journal entry is going to record my cash collections. And just like you would normally, this is a debit to cash and a credit to accounts receivable. So nothing new about this entry. And again, my numbers are aggregated. So when I go back to my problem data, for the years after the first year, I have to deduct the amounts from the prior year. And so this is my 2015 numbers minus my 2014 numbers. Right, just bear in mind again, in some of the questions when you look at the data, it will not automatically be aggregated. So you just have to make sure you look at the wording. If it says to date, that means it's aggregated. If it says during the year, it is not aggregated, so it's just the current year numbers. You can also usually tell whether it's aggregated or not by looking at, and when it's aggregated, you know that over time the numbers are getting larger. Notice here for my check figure, it added up to my contract price. I've collected everything. That is not automatically the case, right? There might be a time delay in collecting the cash. You might get to the end of the contract and not all of the cash has been collected yet. So far, journal entries number 1, 2, and 3, all of these accounts here, and I'll just use different colors. These are all balance sheet accounts. And I'll just put them in blue just to show these are all balance sheet accounts. Nothing has shown up on the income statement yet. Entry number 4 now records the expenses and revenues on the income statement. So record expenses and revenues. And so I debit my contract expenses. I debit my construction in process. And I credit my contract revenue. So my construction is process is a balance sheet account. My contract expenses, contract revenue, that's my 2 income statement accounts. So I'm going to use brown for these ones here. So my contract expenses are what I've spent on the contract. My contract revenue came from my revenue recognition calculations right here. So these I'll just pull across all year. My contract expenses as well. And my construction in process is the difference between my revenue and my expense to balance out my journal entry. And that's a debit, so I'm going to show that off to the side here. Just follow my formatting. There we go. And again, using my check figures, my contract expenses add up to the total dollars I spent on the contract. My revenues add up to 11 million. And my gross profit is the difference between the revenues and the expenses. So just make sure these aren't part of the journal entries here, so I'll just gray those out just to make sure that you see that those aren't included. So those are just check figures here. So that completes the journal entries. In a separate video, I will do the balance sheet or statement of financial position presentation.